to the Honest Pod. I am so excited because, as you know, we're diving into this whole conversation around being free. What does that mean? Around living fully alive. What does that mean? And I sat down with my producer and was like, okay, I want to interview a few people that have actually spoken into this book and I feel have been like this really important um key person in my life of watching them live out some of these pieces. So I got to, when I wrote down this list, there was 4 names that I had on there. And one of them was the amazing Kate Tomlin. Say hi to the people, Kate.
Oh, girl, first of all, I am completely honored. Hey, everyone. I am so excited to be here. And Karrie, I was just flipping back through the book this morning. I know we're going to talk about it, but I'm like, I am so excited for everybody to read this. And you didn't ask me to say that, but I was genuinely this morning flipping through and reading and refreshing for what we're going to talk about today. And I was like, this book is so needed. Like there are a lot of books out there, a lot of books. And there are few books that I can say like, wow, this book is it's going to be so transformative for people. And so I'm just so glad you are putting this out there. And I'm so honored to be one of those 4 people that I get to talk to you today.
I mean, truly, like this all started with me and you when I interviewed you on my podcast for
Oh,
your book. Thank you
yep.
for rejecting me. And honestly, the reason why I had you on is because I like the title so much. I was like, I knew of you from Heart of Dating, and I knew you a little bit because of our mutual friend, Mike Foster. And so I kind of had known you a little bit, but that title just sucked me in because, that's like such a thing to say of like thank you when it's one of our most underlined pieces of pain
Mhm.
is rejection. So that interview ended up being this, wow, this woman has really done a lot of work, has
Mm.
really done a lot of work around living a life that I can say is free and fully alive, and in the aspects of what it's meant to actually name the hard and sit in the hard. So it was a very easy choice when I was like, who are the people that I want to begin to interview and kind of just talk about about this whole book and everything. And so before we kind of dive into the pages of the book, I want to ask you the question, at what moment in your life, and there probably was many moments like we talked about earlier, these are always such loaded questions, but at what moment in your life do you remember going, man, what I'm doing right now is not working and
Mm.
I need, like, I want and I need something different for my life. Like, I am not experiencing the abundant life that God's talked about. I know he's
Yeah.
talked about it, but I am not experiencing it. What was there, like a moment or a season when you can kind of identify enough was enough? I need to get help.
Yeah, and it actually is 2 parts because I feel like it started for me and I started the journey and then I thought I was good enough, which, happens. And
Right.
then I had to reopen the whole healing process. And so the first part of this really happened about 10 years ago, if I'm getting my timeline right. I always think back, I'm like, was it 10 years ago? Something
Right.
in like 10 years ago, where I got out of a really toxic and abusive, almost 3-year relationship. And that relationship is part of my story where it was, abusive in every way. So
Hmm.
emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And it was incredibly toxic. And the physical abuse didn't start till later in the process. But that relationship revealed so much to me because once it finally did end, and there was a whole journey to it really ending, but once it finally ended, I realized like, I don't know who Kate is
Mm,
outside of dating, outside of men, and outside of performance and work, which were 2 things I place my value in so deeply. I don't know who I am outside
mm,
of those 2 things because I looked at my life for the past 10 years and I realized I had been dating back to back for 10 years straight from like 14 to 24 almost.
hmm.
And so I was never single. And outside of never being single, I was always putting my value in performing work and then eventually graduating from college work and like
Hmm.
being the best at everything I was doing. And I realized like I didn't even know who I was and I didn't even know if I liked myself at all. And so
Mm,
there was a lot of self-hatred that I had to wrestle with and seek help from. And so I started a journey of healing in that time. I started going to therapy for the first time in my life, and it started the process of realizing there was more here to be healed and discovered, and it really started my journey of deeply connecting with God. However, I kind of reached a place where I was like, "Okay, now I'm good." I think I got it, like, a year or 2 into the healing, I'm like, "Alright, we're good." Like, I don't really need to go to therapy anymore, I'm good, like, I got this. And
Right.
it wasn't till, like, a few years later where I realized once I restarted dating, because I took a season off, oh, there's some more here, actually. I need to go under deeper layers, and I started actually taking more intensive therapy very seriously. I know you're a big fan of this, but group work
Mhm.
was a
Mhm.
huge part of my healing journey and really revolutionized the kind of healing that I was experiencing. And so I know we'll get more into that, I'm sure, but
Mhm.
it just got to a moment where it's like, did I even like myself? And I think that was the moment where I had to face twice of like, do I really even like who Kate is? And do I even
Mhm.
know who Kate is? Do I
Mhm.
know who this person is without all these other things in my life filling me or telling me who I was? And so those were probably the two moments for me that I really had to take a deeper dive
Mhm.
into what's going on here.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying, and this is something that I talk about in the book, is that there's this place that we are made for goodness, and then in these places of goodness, there's harm that comes,
Yeah.
and it's through our childhood, and there's a lot of things, and we go into it that a ton in the book. But I say that, and this is kind of my own coined phrase, but without dealing with those things, we move into the cycle of false freedom. We move into
Mm.
this place of behavior modification and these behaviors to try to mitigate the pain. What would you say were some of those, and it sounds like relationships, but what would you say were some of those behaviors that you were doing to try to not have to feel the pain of your past? Like, how does someone get in a relationship where they're being hurt?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so for me, definitely I noticed, especially in my teenage years, the biggest coping mechanisms or those behavior modifications I picked up because my child was very loud and angry, and I know we share some similarities in our
Mhm.
childhood years, but I was just very loud and very over the top and very um just and had to control everything
Mhm.
because that my life inside in my home was so out of control. And then eventually when I became a teenager, I kind of learned some new tactics. I realized the yelling, the screaming, the anger wasn't really working for me. Like, I
Mhm.
don't think I would verbally have said, "Oh, this isn't working for me," but I realized, subconsciously this is not really working. So it moved and morphed then into performance. Be the
Mhm.
best, Kate. Be the best. If you're the best, then you're going to be seen. Then your parents will see you, then other people will see you, then you'll feel loved. And then I also turned to men, and the men thing also came because I wanted to be mainly seen. I mean, and also I had a big issue with body shame and insecurity at a young age, and so
Mhm.
I was like, how do I cope with this? Let me turn to men to make me feel beautiful.
Right.
And I so I turned to men, I turned to performance and people pleasing,
Mhm.
and really, really, really deeply cared about what people thought about me. Like,
Mhm.
really cared about the image I was presenting, cared about, like, how do I control this narrative and be and morph into whatever they want, they're kind of wanting, so that they can like me and then I can feel value. And
Mhm.
so but meanwhile, behind the scenes, I noticed as I've reflected in my teenage years, like, I really see so much before I ever got into that abusive relationship of how much self hatred there was in my internal dialogue. Like,
Mhm.
nothing was ever enough. Even if I got that approval of somebody, like, it could always have been better.
Mhm.
If I was so rigorously hard on myself in school too, like in high school, I remember, like, if I got a B on anything, I was completely shaming myself. I was like, you could have
Mm.
done better. You should have gotten an A. You can't do this again. Like, I was so zero grace, just always could be better.
Mhm.
And I was like belittling myself constantly internally. And so I was mocking myself, shaming myself, judging myself body wise, the what I was doing, nothing was ever enough. And so other people may have admired me because I was getting good grades and I dressed really nice, but inside I was like, it's still not enough. And I would always shame myself into trying to be even better. There was no attainable endpoint.
Mhm.
And so on the outside, eventually I grew up a little bit older, and then I of course got my dream career, and I was a girl that was doing it all. I was killing it. I would show up to work in my high heeled shoes and my perfect outfits, and I lived in New York City. I worked in fashion, and people would look at me on the outside and be like, this girl has it all together.
Mm,
Meanwhile, behind closed doors, that time in my life, I was in this abusive relationship, screaming and yelling and fighting with this man till 4 a.m. most nights, and I was
mm,
skinnier than I had ever been, because I wasn't eating. I was so stressed. I There were so many things going on.
mm,
And so I thrived off of, well, at least I'm presenting this perfect image and people think of me this way, but internally I'm completely falling apart. And it was
wow.
easier for me in ways, unfortunately, to accept the things this man was saying about me and how he was treating me, because before even entering into that relationship, there were so many belief systems I had about myself that he just reinforced. And because I already believed all those things, when he reinforced, I'm ugly, I'm not good enough, whatever the narrative was, a part of me already believed that. And I was like, okay,
Right.
well, maybe you're right. And so
Right.
it's much easier to, even though logically you're like, this isn't the way to be treated, if you already believe those things about yourself, it's much harder to get out of it. And so,
Yeah. And
mhm,
something like when I think of these behaviors that we sit in, it's very easy to sit on the outside and go like, how could you do that? Or why would you, and what you're saying is like, well, if you're already believing that, then someone comes along and they can kind of sniff it out because they're like, okay, I can have control here. They just
yep.
partner with what you are already believing on the inside. I'm going to ask you a question. You may not know how to answer it, but I think sometimes, I think all of the time actually, we do behaviors because it serves us in some way.
Mm,
When those behaviors are, it serves us in some way in the moment, and then we lose something really great in the long run. I'm
mm,
curious to you, for you, when you're doing behaviors, because we talk a lot in Free and Fully Alive about behavior modification and how it's such a natural tendency to go into these behaviors because on the front end, they serve something for us. They give us something in the immediate that we long for. What were some of these like, here your body's wasting away, you're in this abusive relationship, you know, and yet we don't do things unless it's giving us some kind of benefit or soothing us in some way,
mm,
or we just wouldn't do it. So
right.
what would you say would have been the benefits, in the sense of being in that, like, what did you get
Mm.
from doing these things that would allow you to stay in that?
Hey, Tori Hine here, and on behalf of Freedom Movement, I have a special invitation just for you. We are hosting an online training on July 29th called Reclaim Your Story. It's a 5-hour live interactive coaching event designed to help you engage your story and understand the physical and the psychological effects of your beliefs and your behaviors so that you can reclaim the God-given story that you were meant to live. Check out all the information that you need in the link in the show notes below. This is going to be a transformative time together, and we cannot wait to see you there.
Maybe you don't know. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, for me, and maybe this is the answer to your question, maybe it's not. I mean, I love just these honest dialogues, but
Right.
I think for me, one thing that I put my identity in with this guy also was, oh, I can help him change. And so
Mm.
if I stick around, I can help him be different, because
Mhm.
it's clear the way he's treating me isn't good, but like I can help him. I can
Right.
make him better. I can make
Mhm.
him see the truth about me. I can make him stop talking to all these girls and cheating on me behind my back. Like I can do that.
Mhm.
Um and I'll just cue up the performance and show him how great I am, and I'll help lead him, in closer walk with Jesus, and we're going to make this happen, And
Mhm.
so I think there was a sense of like, well, maybe I can prove that I also, this is a big part of it, is there was so much gaslighting and manipulation. I also had the sense of, I can prove I'm not crazy. I can
Mhm.
prove that I'm worthy of love. I can prove that like our relationship can be different, because also to the outside, a lot of people were like, why are you still with this person?
Mhm.
Because they were seeing what was going on. And I
Mhm.
was like, I can show them this can be different. I can
Right.
help him. And so I don't know if that's fully the answer to your question. I do know though that that's those were some of the things going on in my mind during that
Yeah,
time.
for sure. And I mean, here's the thing, and like you said, it's the curiosity around this false sense of feeling alive, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all created. In fact, I know we are created in the image of God. We are created to live, as he says in scriptures, an abundant life. I think for the longest time I was like, I know that in my head. What does that even mean? Like, is the abundant life the absence of pain? Is it the
Mm-hmm.
abundant life money? Like, what does that really mean, and how do I get it? And when I look at these behaviors, and even thinking about you and just kind of seeing this story, gosh, here's this girl who has so many dead places, right? Like her
Mm-hmm.
body's wasting away. She's working all hours, she's trying to kill it. The measuring stick is just never, it just keeps growing and she can never get to it. And there's this weird juxtaposition between being with this man who is so cruel and violent, and yet something about you feels alive in that. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
like my body's alive, even though it's violent, at
Right.
least there's something alive that's happening here because I just don't know who I am.
Yeah.
I feel so dead. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, definitely. And also in that cycle of abuse in this case, like there is an actual high that happens when you reconnect with that
Mm-hmm.
person, like the high of getting connected like in any way, whether emotionally or physically, and we did connect physically in that
Mm-hmm.
time, and that was for me like this bonding agent that felt like, oh my gosh, well I am never going to be connected with anyone else like I'm connected with
Mm-hmm.
this guy, like this is
Right.
why I'm staying in this too. So you're right
Right.
to that, because it's like this electric energy in abusive cycles which keeps you coming back, almost like you're addicted to any sort of
Drugs.
drug, right?
Totally.
It's like, why would you go back unless there's some sort of high you're getting from it? And
Right.
that was definitely, and that's a big part of that abuse cycle, is that reconciliation, though it's not true reconciliation, but it's like that
Totally.
coming back together, and you're like, oh okay, it's great,
Mhm.
like this is why I'm here all along, because this feeling, the person, especially in abuse, the person makes you feel as well like you can't live without them, like this is
Right.
the best you're ever going to have, this is your ultimate. And I was convinced like this guy, the connection that we have, albeit very warped, was like incredible after all the lows of toxicity, cheating, physical
Mhm.
abuse, all of that. So
And it's
yeah.
so important to say that because a lot of people, I mean, I go through, it's in one of the chapters, through an addiction cycle. And a lot of
Hmm.
times we look at like addiction as just substance abuse, but really it's any time that our body becomes awakened,
Yeah.
even when it's in abuse, those arousal structures that begin to like make our body kind of feel alive. And if you have had to, early on in your years, sever yourself in some parts of your body to kind of stay alive, then you get into this toxic relationship, but it does something to your brain. There's a sense of oxytocin through that
Hmm.
bonding, those kind of bonding chemicals. And so how confusing, right, when you
Yeah.
look at your relationship and you go, but something happens in my body and it makes it come alive even though I know I'm being harmed. And
Yeah.
that's where that's what I meant, and that's where we got to, was that behavior modification, those places that we step into behaviors because we don't know how to deal with the pain of our past. Those behaviors actually do feed something in us
Mhm.
momentarily,
Yes.
but they are just like any substance abuse or any addiction abuse. They over time begin to strip you further and further and further away from really who you were created to be. And so the
Yes.
question I have for you is, and you kind of already named it, what did you begin to really lose? You
Mm.
got something in the front end. There was, because you don't stay unless there's something, right? There's something
Right.
you were getting. There was some kind of payoff. Like even if it was dirt, like it was some kind of payoff, right? And your body responded to that. And that's how your body was wired. Your body was wired
Mhm.
to be able to feel alive, and it's looking
Yeah.
for life. It's just finding it in counterfeit freedom
Mm.
and counterfeit behaviors. But over time you began to, it wore off,
Yeah.
and you began to lose something. What would you name that this false sense of, this false cycle of freedom began to take from you?
I mean, it took definitely a lot from me because I would identify the lowest season of my life after that relationship. But I mean, the number one thing it took away from me was any sense of love, appreciation,
Mhm.
kindness for myself entirely. If there
Mhm.
was any bit, which I talked about how I already entered that relationship with a lot of sense of like self abuse in my mind and my
Mhm.
eternal narrative, but if there was any of it even there, it was gone. Like I
Yeah,
felt so deeply broken, ashamed. So many people told me not to go back. My story goes that I left him many, many, many times and kept going
sure.
back as one does often in abusive scenarios, but
Mhm.
it got really bad where there was restraining order and I still got back together with him like months after this cuz he actually convinced me that I was crazy and made it all up. And
Mhm.
so I got back together with him and I felt like just so ashamed when things really really started falling apart and things of course happened again like they were going to, but so I
Mhm.
lost completely that sense of love, desire to even know myself
Mhm.
and connect with who Kate was. And also, as a byproduct, not only with myself, I lost friends. I disconnected from my family during this time. There are so many connection points as well that
Right.
I lost because of this relationship as well.
And it takes everything.
Yeah.
It takes everything from you. It promises you, and this is how the enemy works, right? It promises you connection. It
Hmm.
promises you love. It promises you kindness and goodness. And this is honestly, I mean, you've named several addictions structures from
Hmm.
performance
Yeah.
to relationship to body, right?
Hmm.
And then, even for me, ministry was, I mean,
Mm.
I've been clean for 21 years off substance abuse, but understanding that addictive cycle
Yeah.
of drawing you in, and really what we're trying to do is we're really trying to find us. We're really
Hmm.
trying to find us. And the lure is like, just like in the garden, the lure is if you eat of this, you're going to be like God. Everything that you
Yeah.
wanted, you're going to get. And we are so fragile, much more fragile than we even want to care about, right? Like we even want to
Mhm.
name. And then yet it leaves us hiding and in shame. I mean,
Mhm.
it just leaves you left looking at your body going, I am naked, I'm exposed, I have
Yes.
nothing, and I'm ashamed. And praise God that you have moved through so much of this work and so much of the work I talk about in Free and Fully Alive. Even though this book wasn't around, as I know your story, I've watched you walk through the
Mm.
necessary steps of naming some of the places in your childhood where this was rooted, really identifying the enemy, wrestling this out with God, all of these
Yes.
things, which really we talk about those three pillars in the book.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've seen in your life that I just admire so much, and I always say this, out of the particularities of our pain comes the particularities of our calling. And we do
Mm.
get into that in the book. And one of the things
So
that I've
good.
seen in your life is really in twofold, this place around relationship and healthy relationship, and really around this place of just being settled in your own body,
Yeah.
and really like that there's goodness to be recaptured. And if God is a God of heart transformation and the enemy is really the God of behavior modification, then you have really stepped into this idea around what does it mean to heal my heart. And I've seen you do that in so much as you've connected with others, as like
Mm.
others, and you even said it earlier, group therapy, and how others have been such a big
Yeah.
part of your healing. Could you tell me a little bit more about that in
Mm.
relation to like this idea of becoming fully alive and having others be a part of that?
Yeah, I love that. And, I'm going to quote your book or reference like that, the chapter 18 about connecting and grieving with yourself, grieving and connecting with God, and then connecting, grieving with others is
Mhm.
so essential to that equation of really healing entirely. And I think sometimes we wrestle with ourselves. We're like, this is like on a daily basis, typically,
Sure.
right? And then, but if we're really in it, we're like really wrestling, then we're bringing God into it. But then it takes that extra layer of courage to really also hold space with other people. And for me and my journey, this is, I mean, there's a lot I could say, but I will, in that time of my life where we were just talking about after that
Mhm.
abusive relationship, it actually was a massive change point in my life in for many reasons, but also in terms of friendships. It actually
Mhm.
whittled out a lot of friendships that were not healthy for me.
Right.
And it brought in and made space for relationships where I could truly feel seen. And God distinctly placed an amazing friend in my life in that exact season, which I
Mm.
believe is just such a soul friendship that God implanted for both of us because we our story is really wild, but we had both just been through abusive relationships. And one part of for me, I knew nobody else at the time in my life that was going through what I was going through. And most of
Mhm.
my friends had never been through that or knew anybody who had gone through that. So for them, it was like, you're kind of crazy. They thought I was crazy. They were like, you're
Mhm.
acting cuckoo.
Mhm.
Because I mean, I was in ways, but if somebody could have seen or could empathize with what's going on here, it would have made a massive difference in my life. And so right after that relationship ended, I actually I dislocated my shoulder and I was in a very low state. And I told my small group leader, I was having a really rough time, and she said, "There's somebody at your office that's actually a Christian." And once she had described this cute Filipino girl, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I know who you're talking about," because
Mm.
we started work the exact same day. And I won't share the whole story, but it was so phenomenal. I went up to her the next day, my arm in a sling, and I was like, "You're a Christian at this office? You work here?" And she was like, "I
That's
am."
me.
I was like,
Oh
"Ah."
my god.
And she was like, "Wait, what happened to your arm?" And it ends up, Carrie, that not only do we work at the same office, we're both Christians, we lived on the same street in
Wow.
Manhattan, which never happens, across the street from one another. And we have both just gotten out of these abusive relationships. She comes over to my house that night, and like I was in this deep place of shame, as we're just talking about, right? She comes over to my house that night. I'm not about to tell her anything about my past relationship because that's the last thing I ever wanted to do. But she's like sitting there and she's like, "Kate, I don't know why, but the Holy Spirit is like prompting on my heart right now to share something with you that I don't even feel great about sharing, but I'm going to do it." And she's like, I just went through this abusive relationship." And she started opening up to me about this
Wow.
abusive relationship. And I just started weeping.
Mm.
And I was like, "Me too."
Me
And
too.
yes, me too. And it was this moment where and you say this in chapter 18, like being seen and held, like we could both create space for one another and deeply see one another where nobody else in our
Mhm.
life had ever been through the things that we had gone through. And God implanting that friendship in my life and introducing it at that exact moment, which I also think was divine, in after we had both exited those relationships, was so profound for my healing journey. Her friendship, like
Mhm.
I could cry thinking about it right now, like just
This is such a
how
gift.
meaningful that friendship has been with Nika is her name,
Mhm.
and how we have truly like seen each other through the hardest and lowest of lows. And
Mm.
we just that gift of friendship of truly somebody who can see you, know you, make space
Mhm.
for you. It has been such a healing part of my journey to have even
Mm.
just her, let alone the other amazing
Mhm.
close women in my life that are, I would now say, are some of my closest people. um but like
It's
profoundly transformative to have somebody who can deeply see you and
yeah.
know you and make space for you.
It's like when God looked down and he was like, Adam and Jesus are hanging out. And he's like, it's just not good for him to be alone. He's going to need someone else to
Yeah.
hold with him. And we talk a lot about that in the book and
Mhm.
what that really meant. And yes, it's about marriage, but it was also about connection with others and understanding
Yeah.
what they were purposed for to carry you when you could no longer carry yourself, and to be the
Mhm.
conduit for God's love when God feels far. And, God just knew what we needed. And so, yeah, I have seen you now. One of the greatest things that you offer to the world is really helping men and women connect to others,
Mhm.
and to really find the people where they can feel a sense of comfort and care. And then, ideally love, that would be great, through
Yeah.
the heart of dating is really great. Here's what I want to kind of end with and ask you this. What would you say? I mean, we all want a free and fully alive life. That's what we want. And that's clearly why I wrote this book. It's, the subtitle there is Reclaiming the Story of Who You Were Created to Be. And we all want
Mhm.
that. But I don't think it just happens. Like,
Yeah.
we are born, accept Jesus in our heart. That is a beautiful moment, but there's a journey, like there's a process. And for those that are listening that, they want that, they want freedom, they want to live fully alive, what would you say? Because I know for me and you, it doesn't, this is how I feel anyway. Maybe you disagree, but it doesn't just happen. It doesn't,
Yeah.
like, you just wake up one day and you're like, well, I'm free and fully alive. Here we go. What would you say to someone who's like, I want that, but that feels hard, or what does that look like? Or, what would you say to them?
I would say, it's such a good question because also it can feel so daunting. Like the end of
Yes.
that relationship, I'm like, where do I even begin? Like all of this just
Yes.
feels so scary. Like it's like, I
Mhm.
know I can't be here anymore. I'm at the lowest of lows. I can't keep going back to what I was just doing and what the life I was living. But where do I go from here? Like, how do I even get out of this grief and disappointment and shame?
Mhm.
And I would, and being a, performer, as you guys have heard me share, I think for me, I often go to, okay, give me all the 10 steps and I'll do them all right now. And I want quick success and quick fix and let's make it happen. And I'll do it all right now.
Right.
And I'm like, let's go. All right. You
Mhm.
want me to do those 5 things? I'll do it tomorrow. Let's go. Like, and
Right.
I've actually had to learn that, uh, for me, it's just what one step can you take? And, um, and you mentioned in your book too, being in seasons of depression. I think I recently have struggled with that as well the
Mhm.
last few years.
Mhm.
And even in those states, like it feels like so overwhelming. And like, especially when you have the tools,
Yep.
okay, I know what I could be doing or what
Mhm.
I need to do, but all of it just feels like a lot. Like you'd rather run away from everything, especially for me. I'm like in depression. I just want to
Yep.
close out to the world and fall off the cliff. Like that
Right.
sounds a lot
Yep.
better than doing anything.
Yes, so true.
And for me, I just had to resolve to don't do the 5 things, don't do the 10 things, even inviting my now husband into like, hey, I love you. I just need to focus on one thing. What's the
One thing.
one thing I can do today or this week?
So good.
One thing. Like it's a small shift.
Mhm.
And I've said this to you before. I love this. I learned this at onsite in Nashville, but it's like the idea of just you're on a trajectory right now with the sailboat going in one direction. And if you make at least just one subtle change, if you think about that over time, even just that one subtle change
Mhm.
can bring you somewhere entirely different. Like if you make one point of action course different on the sailboat, you're going to still end somewhere completely different. I mean,
Right.
awesome if you want to go 90 degrees, but that's not the goal. The goal is to just
Mhm.
make at least one shift and stick to that one shift, that one step, because even that one thing, even if it seems small, could lead you somewhere entirely different. And
Right.
I think for me, it's just what is that one thing you can do?
Mhm.
And then once you feel like you've mastered or you've not mastered, but you've
Yeah.
started really doing that one thing well, what's the next thing,
Yeah.
And it's not going to be easy. And there are going to be days with that one thing that you suck. And so it's
Mhm.
like, okay, fine. Today I didn't do that thing well. What
Mhm.
tomorrow? Let's
Mhm.
recommit to it. And
Right.
it really is that daily journey,
Mhm.
but not losing sight of it. Like one every day, what's the one thing I can keep doing to commit to myself in this journey?
Yeah. So
And
good.
so I
So
think that's
good.
something that's
And
really
I think
helped.
I think the one step allows us to just have grace. Like, this is
Yeah.
not, I mean, your heart was really hurt and it was
Mhm.
really discarded. And there's so many layers to what had happened and how you got where you are. And there's been so much redemption where there was
Mhm.
what was broken in relationship, actually, by the grace of God, was healed in relationship.
Yeah.
Where you're married now, and there's beauty in that. But friends, for those of you that are listening, a fully alive life is not about arrival. It's
Mm-hmm.
about understanding that it's cyclical. There's this like process of like
Yep.
grieving and connection and identifying where's the enemy trying to play this. But as just like what Kate said, as we're slowly moving, you know, we don't ever, if we continue moving in that way, we don't ever end back where we fully were. We are more aware. So even though depression might rear its ugly head right now, that's honest and that's true. And that's where you are. And it's hard and it's messy. And yet, that if I continue to hold this with invitation, one rudder move still moves me in a different direction.
Yeah.
And it won't be the depression that takes me out. And I also have the courage to be able to name it and not avoid it and run from it like I did
Mm-hmm.
before, because I didn't. And that, I think, has been so beautiful for your life, and to watch how that
Mm.
has been. And okay, so last question. All this
I
has
love
just
it.
been so good. I love it. It's such a good, I love talking with you
Me too,
because you're
Karrie.
so
Oh.
honest. It's just, you're so good. You're so honest. Your heart is so pure. It's just so pure
Mm.
to, like, you guys need to know this woman really, really loves people. Like,
Mm.
really. And it comes from a place of being so unloved in
Mm.
so many ways. And yet, only by the grace of God has your heart, it didn't close all the way. It healed and was able to blossom again, and
Mm.
has just been such a beautiful thing. It's why I'm constantly like, whatever I can do with you, I want to do with you, because it's just, it's
Oh.
honest and real. Okay, so the last question is, and again, I didn't give you any of these questions because I am
I
just
know.
not that prepared. Like, let's just be honest, that would be way too prepared for me. But how for you would you define a fully alive life for you? What does it look like for you to live fully alive? How
Wow.
do you hold that?
Mm. Gosh, it's such a great question that I'm like, oh man, I don't have like a perfectly wrapped bow answer, but
Sure.
I would say finding the grace for yourself each day and starting that over each day
Hmm.
and being committed with courage to the journey no matter what. I
Yeah.
think if I could put it in a sentence, it's like finding the grace for myself every day and empowering myself to have the courage to stay on the journey.
Mm.
Because I think it's really easy. You shared about some of these moments in your book too, and I've struggled with this where now you've gone through a lot of healing. You may have a ministry, you're in another place, but you still struggle with things. It's not you're invincible. It's like, okay, no, I'm
Right.
still a human. Life still happens. There's still parts of myself I have to reflect on. There's still things I'll need to heal. And not allowing imposter syndrome or
Hmm.
anything to say, oh, well, you've done all this work. Why are you struggling with this now? I think
Right.
for me, it's taken a lot of courage to say, okay, let me still step into this, admit with humility that I still have things to go through and work
Of
on,
course.
and be committed like with curiosity as well, I would say,
Hmm.
to just continuing to be on this journey, like that endurance. I mean, I think often of James, and in James 2, we're
Hmm.
going through that in our small group right now. Like, just what does it look like to have joy in the moments where you are just gaining endurance, where the battle
Mm.
is all around, but I can still have joy that I'm learning and growing in my endurance,
Hmm.
because that is what ultimately makes you stronger. And that when you can find joy in the midst of a storm, any kind, like, not saying it's not painful, not
Right.
saying there isn't healing to be done, but you're like, I accept this storm because I know there's going to be another side to it. And I
Hmm.
know that this will produce endurance, and that endurance will
Hmm.
help me to continue to face more and more storms of life. It's not to get to a place where no storms come, it's to have
Right.
the strength, the endurance, the curiosity, the courage to stay on the journey by clinging to that joy and clinging
Mm.
to endurance, the joy that makes no sense. And
Right.
so I would say just Yeah, I all of that would be
It's
my
so good.
answer, I
No,
suppose.
it's so good, and I love this idea around curiosity, around your humanity of what you said.
Mhm.
One of the things that I appreciate about you is your tenacity to not go back to severing parts of you.
Mm,
Like, where I have watched, from the sidelines and then also closer to you, there's this real commitment to your humanity
mm,
and what it means to fully be human. So there's really a lot of joy there. And there's
mm,
also pain that is still there. And from the stories you've told me before, there was such a commitment to severing so much of you so that you
mm.
didn't have to feel the weight of what you were really in.
Yeah.
And I have watched now this desire for you to go, I refuse to sever, even when it's hard,
Mm,
so that I can feel the fullness of the joy and allow myself to feel the fullness of the sorrow. And I know you do
yeah.
this because I watch you do this with the people that you lead and teach. Like, we can hold both of
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
And that I have watched and admire so much about you,
Mm,
because you don't run, you aren't severing, even when in naming depression. It's like, that's here, that's a part of my humanity that's here and real right now, or a
mhm,
few years ago, or whatever. And instead of performing my way out of that or fully indulging it, it's holding it in honesty with invitation. And I have seen that, and I think that's
mm,
why so many are drawn to you. And that's why my hope would be that, for all of you guys that are listening, you hear Kate's story. Both her and I write these in pages because we want to help you. I want to help you because I did not understand how. I
yeah.
just didn't know the how. I knew I wanted a different life. I knew I wanted, and I knew all the scriptures. I did a Beth Moore Bible study. I mean, that should make me get, at least a couple
I
jewels in
mean,
my crown.
it's
You
Beth
know,
Moore,
is Beth
right?
Moore. I mean, is she close to Jesus? Probably. I did the church thing. I just did so many
Mhm,
so many behaviors. And, some of those behaviors are not wrong, but when they are taking the place
mm,
of really tending to my heart and where I needed to go, it sought me out on a journey that compelled me. And I know it's compelled you too, to just
mhm.
go, well, what does it actually mean to
Yeah.
live fully alive? And so the pages of this book are written for you. And I appreciate you coming on
Oh,
and sharing with my people and your people
I love
just
it.
a little bit about this book and what it's meant to you, even though I know you didn't write it. I feel like
Oh,
we
it
write
means
this
oh,
together, like we walked
it's
this
so good.
together.
Yes. I'm like, man, that's why I'm going to be the biggest advocate for this book, Carrie, because I mean, I know so many people who've written books, but I'm like, there are a few, if I'm being really honest, and I'll do it on your podcast. Like, there's few where I'm going to support my friends, but this is a book where I'm like, I support you because you're my friend, but also because I deeply, deeply believe in the power of the words you've written, the tools you're handing out to people for $15 or whatever your book
Yeah.
cost is. It's like
Right.
you are literally giving them something that can be so transformative and help them feel also so seen in the process. And it's just so, so powerful. And
Mm,
so I just stand for you. I stand with you in this book. I am like so excited for all the people that are going to read it. And I'm just so proud of you because this is
thanks.
so needed. And the work that you do outside, even a bit above and beyond this book, it's just so powerful. You are so gifted. I could
Mm,
just go on and on with that,
thank
but
you.
I adore you.
Thank you, Kate. Those are such kind words, and they land on me well, and I take them to heart because I really respect you. So
Mm,
thank you so much. Guys, if you want to get free and fully alive, you can pre-order now. Pre-orders matter. I
they
didn't
do.
know this until I got published.
They
But
really matter, everyone.
they do matter. So if you want to pre-order, in addition to that pre-order, you do get some bonuses. You get a couple of videos about what does it mean to be free? What does it look like to be fully alive, which is more content that's not in the book. And you also get a kind of pull back the veil podcast when I share about the heartache behind writing this and some extra stories that are added there. Kait Tomlin, everybody, thank you so much for being on. I adore you. And I'll see you soon because we're just hanging out and it's just
I
what
love
happens.
it. Thanks,
Thanks so
girl. I
much.
love it.
Bye.